Hey, it's Summer and Candace with the Connected Life Book Club. We are officially into week 3 of our discussion on finding God's life for my will, which means chapters 6 to 8. And like a lot of you guys at this time, we're apart. We're doing this from a distance. I'm at home. Candace is in the studio right now, but it's just a weird time. But what a perfect opportunity to get together as a community around some solid books. And I don't know about you, Candace, but I love how we didn't read this book in advance. We didn't choose these chapters or the breakdown, but I feel like last week, everything was about how God derailed our lives and changed our dreams. And this week is totally about getting over yourself. Like every chapter is just about letting the ego go. And so I just think thematically it works really well. And so let's just jump in. Chapter 6, it says, how can we actively seek those interruptions that become ministry moments? What do you think of that, Candace?
Well, this chapter really spoke to me because I'm somebody, like my mom worked in ministry my entire growing up life. I obviously work in ministry now. And there is a theme in ministry that you often come face to face with some of the most difficult personalities than any other work. I mean, it's kind of like retail in that way. But that's all part of God's plan, right? Is how we can love those people that are difficult to connect with sometimes, or maybe have some oddities. And he shared a story about a boy that they were like, oh gosh, I guess we'll let this kid play basketball with us. But then he became, the star of the show, and they really looked forward to spending time with him. And so when he talks about declassifying people, whoa, did that jump out at me or what? He said even here, after reading Ephesians 6:12, our enemy is sin, our enemy is hatred. So we must fight against anything in our own hearts that would hinder a spirit of reconciliation. And how many times do we get into a disagreement or just see things differently with somebody that is a brother or sister in Christ, and maybe just cut losses, say, well, we're just not meant to be in community. That's fine. We'll go our own way. And I don't know, maybe that doesn't happen to people a lot. I can think of probably 2 or 3 instances in my life where it has been just difficult reconciliation moments. And my first instinct is to give up. But God calls us to push through those really tough moments. And those can be some of the biggest ministry moments that God works in our lives, and that can come from that reconciliation. So that was really moving to me, and a really good reminder that just because it's hard doesn't mean you quit. What about you? How can we actively seek those interruptions that can become ministry moments?
Well, I think the first step is probably just stop avoiding the interruptions. I think that we look at what we believe God has called us to do, that path that he's had us on, and we're like, okay, this is it. This is where I'm going. I need to focus because Satan's going to try to distract me with things that aren't important. They're going to take my eyes off the prize. And you know what? Anything that is a distraction from what God's called me to do, it's just one of those get behind me, Satan kind of moments. But like, like it was talked about with the woman who reached out to Jesus as he was on his way to do something very important. Like he had an end in mind. He was heading to Jairus' house to heal his daughter. And yet here comes this woman. And instead of shaking her off as a possible distraction, something put in his way to be an obstacle, he's like, no, this is the ministry. And so I think we get very narrow-minded when it comes to doing what we believe God's called us to do. And in some cases, that's helpful, having that laser focus. But then it causes us to not see who's sitting on the side of the road. That like Samaritan who's wounded. Well, I'm on a mission. I got places to be. I got things to do. Good luck. You're somebody else's project because my project lies up ahead.
Right.
And I think just getting over our own importance in our ministry and just keeping our eyes open for who God has by the wayside that he might have put there for us, and understanding and seeing people as there for us to serve instead of, the other way around.
Yeah, I think in my experience, it's the most uncomfortable person to deal with. It's the person that makes you feel the most like, oh, I kind of don't want to, but that's where God stretches and grows us. That's really good. So in chapter 7, the leader label lie is the title of the chapter. And I thought this was a really interesting chapter. I'm curious your thoughts, Summer. How can you erase the, quote, leader mentality from our lives?
Okay, this chapter bent my brain a little bit. I think it has to do with what he said toward the beginning of the chapter. He says, quickly and subconsciously, a culture's values blur into moral imperatives. So, we're, especially as Americans, we're told, don't be followers, be leaders, blaze your own path, and, don't be sheep, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's exactly what Christ called us to be. And I think this whole chapter has just been, I don't know, I'm still wrestling with it a little bit. I don't know that I 100% am on board with everything that he says in this chapter, because I think I get what he's trying to say, but I think it maybe requires some parsing through. So like he says later in the chapter, I'm sure I have it highlighted, but I don't really feel like taking a sec to find it. But he talks about like the problem with leadership isn't being a leader, it's the label itself, and how the label is something that we end up aspiring to. And we do that for our own glory, whereas like leadership needs to come naturally as a consequence of people wanting to follow us because of who we follow, which I think is really a beautiful thought. But then it is tricky when it comes to like, okay, well, men are called to be the spiritual leaders in their home. And what does this mean when you go for a job promotion and you are literally applying for a leadership role? And so I think there's just the semantics of leader made this chapter a little hard for me as an English-speaking American to get around, because it's just the word itself has so many layers. But I loved what he said. I understood what he was getting at. And it's just like this whole theme of getting over yourself. And so erasing the leader mentality, if you are aiming for a position of quote unquote leadership, what are you aiming for? And I think that's really what it comes down to, is what is your motivation? Is it because you want to be in charge? Because if you're being completely honest with yourself, there's this buzz, there's this high that comes with having people look up to you. Or is it because you feel like God has gifted you in such a way to serve in this role effectively? And I think, yeah, it's about diving deep into those motivations.
It's interesting because that's kind of what I thought right away. I had a problem with this chapter from the first page. I mean, I was like, what does he know? Like, servant leadership is a thing, blah, blah, blah. I think that was the biggest thing that bothered me, as he was saying, servant leadership is not a thing. You just are a servant. There's no need to include the word leadership. You're just a servant, and God calls us to be a servant. By the end of the chapter, he had me convinced. And I would dare say that he was even saying that it's not a semantics thing, that leadership shouldn't be a goal of ours at all. I mean, I think that he was talking about, getting things done, that yes, people need to get things done, and it's, nice to organize people and whatnot, but all of that is kind of administrative type things, whereas like the word leadership specifically means being in front of people and having them follow you, but in no way, shape, or form should we have people following us. They should be following Jesus.
But how does that work in like a work setting though? Like, I mean, if you have like the position of CEO is open, the president of a company, the leader of a company, but we should never aspire to leadership. That's where I think I got kind of tripped up, is seeing implications outside of the Christian realm, just leadership in general. If it's not something we're supposed to want, who fills those roles?
Right. Well, and I think that's more what I guess I'm saying as far as like the administrative side of things, like actually, making the calls and making things happen is more like I'm following Jesus. I don't know. Okay, so like, because he says right here, he says, I recently heard a speaker at a fancy banquet say that Jesus actually coined the term servant leader. And he said, I recoiled. No, I thought, squirming in my seat. Jesus didn't add the word leader. We did. Jesus just told us to be servants. And so I like later he addresses it. Okay, Mike, that's great and all, but it doesn't really help me. People are looking to me for a plan. Your theories about leadership doesn't change the fact that I'm the one in charge right now, the head of a company, family ministry. I have to lead or no one else will. And so that's kind of like where he then goes into addressing that we can let go and focus on the voice of God. And we can begin to ask the right questions of what is Christ saying to me right now? How would he want me to treat my employees? How can I direct my energy towards building his kingdom and not my own? So I guess you are right about the semantics to a certain extent, but I mean, he really pushes back against like any term that has to include leader.
And that's where I think for me, I really had to kind of sit with this one because like he says on page 88, he goes, but I think a lot can go wrong for us when an individual seeks power or wants to be known as the leader. Do you want to lead by serving as Jesus did, or do you want to be labeled a leader while other people serve you? And then on the next page, he goes, Jesus was a great follower. Like Jesus himself didn't seek to lead. You know, he goes, he laid aside his rights, his divinity, and his will to follow the Father. And then through that, he became a leader. Like that's what God had for him. And so God made it happen. And, you know, and he called his disciples to follow. He never called them to lead. And as good followers, they ultimately ended up leading by calling other people to follow. And so it's just like, it's like smoke coming out of my ears.
Oh, my word. So that really, I mean, I think we did a good job kind of trying to break down the actual chapter, but now, how can you kind of apply that to your own life? You personally, Miss Summer Shepherd.
I think it really is changing out that word when it comes up. So it's like, okay, Mike would argue that the term should be servant instead of leader. So it's like, okay, someone comes up to me, is like, Summer, I want you to lead this ministry. It's like, okay, Summer, I want you to serve in this ministry. Okay, how can I serve? And I think it's just maybe for our own ego, just when we hear that word, we associate it with something different. And it just kind of helps us come in and really just take our own temperature. Why do I want this? Do I want this for the right reasons? How can I serve well in this role? And being willing to walk away from those lofty opportunities if we feel like there's anything that's kind of rubbing the wrong way when it comes to our motivation.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I mean, I do have a weird relationship with the word leader because as far as like being decisive and essentially persuading people to follow my plan or like things like that, that's kind of something that has come naturally to me for most of my life. Part of it is being an oldest child, I think, you know, and wrangling 3 younger siblings. But I think another part of it is that I do take a little bit of pride in that, don't worry, I got this. I can, you know, speak in a way that is going to reach multiple people and have a clear form of communication to get the project done. You know, to take people's needs into consideration with certain projects, to make sure multiple people are happy. I mean, girl, you should see me throw a party. Like, it, you know, I do have a certain level of pride attached to that. And I think that it is just shifting that out and saying, okay, instead of how can I make it so that this project gets done or these people are all happy, you know, from a kind of people-pleasing perspective, how can I work towards serving God's kingdom? And I think having more of a kingdom mindset and less of an earthly mindset, because I'd say a lot of leadership is reacting to our earthly influences and reacting to you know, the situations that we find ourselves in, as opposed to, okay, well, where does God want us to be in this specific situation. So yeah, I think that keeping a kingdom mindset would be most beneficial for my view of what a leader is and how I can actually like remove that from how I label myself or the kind of person that I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a thinker.
Oh, this whole section. I mean, like even chapter 8, as we head into that, the naked Marine.
Oh my word. That was so funny.
I scared the junk out of my kids because I'm sitting in here like reading, and all of a sudden I just start scream laughing when it came to that point because like I did not see that coming at all, and they were real concerned. Now I've got to tell you, if in this chapter, again, maybe you're listening and you read this a long time ago, this is where the trespass on the big bad Marine's property, and he gets all mad at him, and all of a sudden he starts screaming and strips naked and jumps in the water because he had released an entire can of pepper spray at his own crotch. I can't even describe it.
Oh my word.
Now, Candace, I'm going to say, I think it was kind of a weak tie into what he was going into the chapter. I feel like he just really wanted to tell this story.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like, okay, Mike, thank you for that. But I also don't know that it quite goes where you want it to go for this chapter. But the chapter was really about getting over yourself. Like anything that helps us to focus on anything other than ourselves. And he used that as to be like, I was totally distracted and I wasn't even thinking about myself. But anyway, so the question is, what hinders you from looking outside yourself, and how can you change that viewpoint?
Oh my word. I would say that this time that we're in is one of the most, I don't know, I think that it's huge as far as like what we're all dealing with the quarantine, with self-isolating. It is so difficult to look outside yourself because if you turn on the news, if you turn on, even go on Facebook or something like that, it's all just bad news. I mean, people kind of fighting and all these kinds of things. So I do find myself just focusing more on my own world, what's going on inside my house. So what better time to practice than all you have to do is look at your own world. And I noticed that during quarantine, the first couple days, I spent a lot of time on Facebook, like a lot of time on Facebook and Instagram. And I was like, oh, what a great time to be posting more and sharing what's going on in my life and interacting with people. But really, I walked away at the end of those days. I'd put down my phone and go, where have the hours gone?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just, it was more draining than anything to be constantly trying to keep up with, how am I presenting myself? What pictures am I going to share? Let me put a filter and a, caption, and it's going to be so cute and awesome, and people are going to think this about me. And it just is not my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
But really, when I look at people doing that from an outsider's perspective, it doesn't seem inherently selfish. But then when I go through and I do it, I'm like, ugh, I feel very self-focused and not great, So yeah, I would say definitely getting social media out of my life, or at least in a different priority, in a different place in my life, could be a huge way to change some of those hindrances that keep me from looking outside of myself. But then even just actively seeking out ways that I can help others. Because when you're helping others, when you are going out and doing those things, inherently you can't be looking at yourself all the time. You can't be so worried about what's going on in your world. And I've been doing that a little bit, trying to think of how I can help my neighbors. Because, we just got the stimulus check and things like that. And I'm like, how can I use this money to help my neighbors? Maybe it looks like going to buy them groceries so they don't have to go to the grocery store. They don't have to worry about food for the week. Or maybe it's a gift card for a takeout place, or, I'm just trying to think of those things, and it keeps me a lot less focused on my wants and things that are going on inside of me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I don't know. Those are some key points. I feel like it's super obvious with the social media thing. And it's been a years long lesson to be learned that I'm not sure I'll get over anytime soon. But, at least we're pinpointing the problem here.
No, I think it's really important because I don't always know that social media is the obvious thing that we're turning to from a pride perspective, because I think we've gotten really good at painting that picture on social media of like, I'm going to post something spiritual, and I'm going to post something about needing to be humble, and I'm going to post something about, these feel good stories about people serving. And we feel like that makes us less self-focused, more humble, and better servants. But really it's like, well, the fact that we felt the need to post that, like I found myself spending a lot more time, having memory making opportunities with the kids, which has been amazing. But I have also done that, Candace, where I like step outside myself and I'm like, what is happening here? I'm in the middle of the moment. I'm like, hold on, guys, as I'm posting the picture online or I'm posting that funny conversation because I don't want to forget that cute thing they just said. And so I take myself out of the moment, and it is inherently a very self-focused thing, social media. But even beyond that, our culture implores us to focus on ourselves. Like, the term self-care, and all of that. It's about putting on your own mask before others, et cetera. And I understand the concept, but we are told that in order to be healthy, functional people, we need to come first. We need to evaluate. We need to discern if this is good for me or not, if this is, beneficial to me or not, and to cut those people out, to cut those situations out. And there are times where, it makes sense, but then I think that ingrains itself deeper into our psyche to where we are always putting ourselves first.
Right, sure.
And judging everything through that lens. And so he says, I love this line. He goes, I believe now that affirmation is not the cure for ego. People telling us how good we are, but wonder is. Just stepping back and like staring at a mountain or understanding what it is that, Christ did for us and living in that and soaking that up. It crowds out, the space that we've saved for ourselves to wonder at ourselves. And he goes, and how we try to solve this by just being more loving, focusing on other people. But he goes, if your obsession with yourself is growing while your love for others is fading, maybe you don't need to try to be more loving. Maybe you need to reacquaint yourself with the love God already has for you. And it's just all about the whole book so far has been, the more we focus on Christ, the more we fall away and the more our own agenda falls away. And so, yeah. And this actually has nothing to do with the point, but I thought it was hilarious and a beautiful line when he's talking about propitiation. He goes, propitiation, by the way, is a big Bible word that can be translated simply in this way. We were going to get spanked, but Jesus put his butt in the way. And so, but like remembering and focusing on that is what crowds out the self-focus.
Yeah. Well, and I think another way that we can get distracted by self-focus is when we're looking at all the things that we need to do or we need to accomplish. And I think if anything comes out of this quarantine, it's that we really don't have to. When it comes to filling your schedule, filling every night of the week with a different, Bible study or volunteer thing or, sport or something, we just really don't have to fill our lives with all of that. And he even says here, we never get free by thinking about ourselves. Freedom comes from forgetting ourselves. And so when we think of like, oh, I'm a failure because I didn't do this at home. I'm a failure because whatever, that's not freedom. We're not going to shame ourselves into freedom. We can only get freedom when we do focus on Jesus and when we forget about ourselves and our little to-do list that really, when it comes down to it, doesn't make much of a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think he was quoting Tim Keller, who was quoting C.S. Lewis or something when he was saying, humility isn't thinking less of ourselves. It's thinking of ourselves less. And so, downplaying like, oh man, I failed. I'm not that great. I'm nobody. It's still just such another self-focused thing. And so I think there's a lot in this book that I know for me, I'm going to really have to kind of sit with for a while, because it's not just like a quick, oh yeah, it makes sense, moving on. It's like even those things that we feel are just humble and deflective are still self-centered.
Well, and he does a really good job of making them very attainable. I mean, these huge revelations are coming from life experience and stories, and it feels more doable, reasonable when I'm looking at my own life. And so I've really appreciated that. And so let's see, next week is going to be week 3, right?
Week 4 already is next week.
Oh boy. All right. Week 4 already. So then that's chapters 9, 10, and 11. And we will be sending out that discussion guide. And if you haven't yet signed up to be a part of the Connected Life Book Club, maybe you just came across this podcast or something, you can be a part of our Facebook group and actually talk out some of these things that are going on in your life. And you can sign up at connectedlifebookclub.com.
And if you haven't already, subscribe for our podcast. This is the perfect time to do it. Every Friday, we drop another one of these discussions, allowing you to kind of sit in as we share our thoughts. And as always, we'd love to hear yours. Like Candace said, you can get connected at connectedlifebookclub.com. Thanks.
All right. See you next week.